"Stay away from our marriage, Eleanor. You're not welcome here." Those words still burn in my ears, even now. They were delivered across the kitchen table on a crisp autumn morning in Burlington, Vermont. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, stared at me with cold determination while the scent of freshly brewed coffee hung between us. Outside, golden leaves drifted down, covering the small garden I'd tended for 3 months. There was no shouting, just those calculated words while my son Thomas sat silently beside her, staring down at his coffee cup, his large hands, so like his father's, gripping the mug he wasn't drinking from. "Thomas?" I whispered, searching his eyes for some defense, but he only said, "Maybe it's for the best, Mom." And in that moment, I felt my world collapse for the second time in less than a year. Let me tell you what led to that moment. My name is Eleanor Bennett. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I knew my place in the world. I was Harold's wife for 45 years, until a heart attack took him 9 months ago. Our home in Cedar Falls, a small community 30 minutes from Burlington, suddenly felt too big, too quiet. The empty rooms echoed with memories. The creaking floorboards at night were no longer Harold returning late from the garage, where he tinkered with antique clocks. It was Thomas who suggested I move into their guest room for a while. "Until you get used to being alone, Mom," he said. Rebecca smiled and agreed, though her eyes already showed hesitation. But in my persistent naivety, always my weakness, I missed the signs. During those first weeks, everything seemed to work well. I helped with my 12-year-old grandson, Oliver, while they worked. I prepared dinners, I tended the garden, small tasks that gave me purpose and, I thought, lightened their burden. The first turning point came when I found Rebecca crying in the kitchen late one night. I approached to comfort her, but she pulled away. "It's nothing," she said. The next day, I noticed she had rearranged the cupboards I had organized. A small change, but a warning I ignored. Then came the small tensions. Rebecca began rejecting my dinners, saying she was trying to eat healthier. Oliver was instructed to do his homework alone because Grandma doesn't know modern teaching methods. Doors began closing when I approached. Everything truly changed when Susan Wright, an old family friend and widow like myself, came to visit. We were animatedly discussing old times when Rebecca walked in and overheard Susan saying, "Thomas is so lucky to have you here, Eleanor. Harold would be so proud to see how you're keeping this family together." Rebecca's look in that moment, cold, cutting, full of resentment, should have warned me. The following day, I discovered my family photographs, which I had discreetly placed in the hallway, had been moved to my bedroom. One night, I overheard Thomas and Rebecca arguing quietly in their bedroom. "She's taking my place, Thomas, in my own home." Rebecca's voice trembled. "It's not intentional," my son replied, but his voice lacked conviction. That's when I realized my mistake. It wasn't just a house I had invaded. It was the emotional space of a woman trying to maintain her own home intact. I tried to pull back. I started spending more time in my room. I stopped suggesting changes around the house. But it was too late. Tension escalated when Elizabeth, Rebecca's sister, came with her children for dinner. In the middle of the meal, her 8-year-old son, Jack, spilled juice. I automatically stood up to clean it. "I'll handle this, Eleanor," Rebecca said sharply. "This is my house." The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth looked at me with pity, and that hurt more than any words. Later that night, I heard Oliver ask why Grandma was sad. Rebecca answered, "Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't understand when they're no longer needed." Those words opened a deep wound in me. For the first time since Harold passed, I cried myself to sleep. The situation worsened when I found a list of retirement homes on the computer Rebecca had left open. It wasn't for me to see, certainly, but there it was, a search for affordable options for independent seniors. My name was written on the notepad beside it. The message was clear. They wanted me gone. I confronted Thomas the next day when we were alone. "You want me to go to a nursing home?" I asked, my voice shaking. The look of surprise on his face seemed genuine. "What are you talking about, Mom?" When I explained what I'd seen, his face flushed with shame. Rebecca was just exploring options for the future. For when I become a complete burden? I asked. He didn't answer, and his silence said everything. A major turning point came when, during a tense dinner, Oliver innocently announced, "Dad, did you know Grandma was a piano teacher? She showed me some notes today." Rebecca froze. "You gave him lessons without asking me?" He found the old photos in my room and asked. I began explaining. "We don't need piano lessons," Rebecca interrupted. "Oliver has science classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "But I liked it, Mom," Oliver protested. "It's not about what you like, it's about what you need," Rebecca responded, looking directly at me as she said need. That night, a storm hit Burlington. Rain lashed against the windows like accusations. Wind howled through the trees in the garden I had so carefully tended, tearing away the last flowers I had planted. Tension grew when Rebecca found Oliver in my room the next day, looking through a photo album of Thomas as a child. "You're filling his head with the past," she accused me afterward. "He needs to focus on the present, on the future." "They're just stories, Rebecca. Family stories," I replied. "Our family, Thomas, Oliver, and I, doesn't need to live in your stories," she said. Her words hit me like stones. It all culminated on that fateful morning when Rebecca finally verbalized what her eyes had been saying for weeks. "Stay away from our marriage, Eleanor. You're not welcome here." 2 hours later, I stood with my bags in the living room, waiting for a taxi. Thomas looked tormented, torn between his duty to his wife and to his mother. Oliver cried quietly in the corner. Rebecca remained in the kitchen, refusing to say goodbye. "Where are you going, Grandma?" Oliver asked between sobs. "Back to our home in Cedar Falls," I answered, trying to smile. "It's time to face those empty rooms." "I'll visit you," he promised. Thomas approached, uncomfortable. "Mom, it didn't have to be this way. We could have found a place for you here in Burlington." "A home for the elderly, you mean?" I asked, without bitterness, just stating the fact. He didn't answer. The taxi arrived. I hugged Oliver for a long time. When I turned to Thomas, he embraced me quickly, as if afraid of being seen showing too much affection. "I'll call you," he said. In the taxi, I looked out the window at the house that, for a brief moment, I thought could be my new home. Rebecca stood at the window, watching my departure. Our eyes met for an instant. There was no triumph in her gaze, only relief. "Are you wondering what it feels like to be exiled from your own family? To be treated like an unwelcome guest in your child's life? The pain doesn't come all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation, until one day you realize everything you thought was solid has been quietly washing away." I returned to Cedar Falls that afternoon. The house was exactly as I had left it, covered with a thin layer of dust, like my hopes. The antique clock that Harold had been fixing before he died was still on the living room table, stopped at the same time. The first weeks were the hardest. The phone rarely rang. Thomas called briefly on Sundays, superficial, intense conversations. Oliver tried to call me twice, but the calls were short, with Rebecca clearly nearby. It was Margaret Wilson, my 70-year-old neighbor, who pulled me out of isolation. She knocked on my door with a homemade cake and an unwavering determination not to let me sink. "You need to get up, Eleanor," she said. "Harold wouldn't want to see you like this, and you know it." Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. I started giving piano lessons to neighborhood children again. I joined the Cedar Falls community group. Time passed, 3 months, 6 months. The pain diminished but never completely disappeared. The great turning point happened on a rainy Sunday when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Rebecca alone, soaked by the rain and visibly nervous. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Sitting in the living room with the ticking of Harold's clock, which I had finally fixed, marking the silence between us, Rebecca finally spoke. "I came to apologize," she said, looking at her hands, "and to explain." She then told a story I could never have imagined. Rebecca grew up in a house dominated by her own mother, Judith, a controlling woman who interfered in every aspect of her life. When she married Thomas, she vowed she would never allow another maternal figure to take control of her family. "When you moved into our house, I saw all my fears materializing," she confessed. The way Thomas looked to you for approval, how Oliver ran to you with his stories. I felt like I was disappearing in my own home. I never wanted to replace you, I replied, realizing the painful irony of it all. I know that now, she said. Thomas and I started couples therapy after you left. I realized it wasn't about you. It was about my own insecurities, my own fears. I looked at her with new eyes, seeing not a cruel woman, but a wounded person acting from her own trauma. The compassion I felt surprised me. The conversation continued for hours. We shared tears, some hesitant laughter, and finally, a mutual understanding. Before leaving, Rebecca said something I will never forget. You're not the mother I had, Eleanor, and I needed time to understand that. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from Thomas inviting me to dinner. Just a visit, he clarified, for now. The reunion was cautious but warm. Oliver hugged me so tightly I almost lost my balance. Rebecca welcomed me with a hesitant but genuine smile. During dinner, Rebecca announced she was pregnant again, a late surprise for everyone. We would like you to be part of this child's life, Eleanor, she said, in a way that works for all of us. I looked at the faces around me, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandson, and felt something I didn't expect to feel again. Belonging. Not like before, not as I had imagined, but something new and equally valuable. Today, a year later, I have my own apartment in Burlington, 10 minutes from their house. I visit twice a week. Not too much, not too little. I help with Oliver and little 3-month-old Sarah when asked. Rebecca and I occasionally have coffee together, slowly building a friendship neither of us imagined possible. The truth I discovered through this painful journey is that family love is not a competition, nor a space that diminishes when shared. It's a constantly expanding territory, with boundaries that need to be respected, but also flexible enough to accommodate growth and change. Sometimes we need to step away to find our way back, not to the same place, but to a new space where everyone can exist without diminishing each other. The bags I packed that day didn't lead me to an end, as I feared, but to a new beginning I could never have imagined. And for that, I now understand there is a deep wisdom in knowing when to leave, and an even greater courage in knowing how to return, transformed, humble, and ready to love in a new way. I wish I could tell you that my return to Cedar Falls that autumn day was the end of my story, that I simply settled back into my old life, accepting the rejection as just another loss in a year already defined by grief. But life, especially at my age, is rarely so simple or so final. Those first days alone in Harold's and my house were like walking through a museum of what used to be. Every room held memories that both comforted and haunted me. The kitchen where we'd shared morning coffee for 45 years, the living room where Harold would fall asleep watching old westerns, his reading glasses sliding down his nose, the garden where he'd built me a bench under the maple tree for our 40th anniversary. "You'll sit here when you're too old to garden," he'd joked, "and I'll bring you lemonade." But Harold wasn't bringing lemonade anymore, and now Thomas and his family had also slipped away from me. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching surfaces, straightening pictures that didn't need straightening. I'd catch myself setting the table for two or calling out, "I'm home," when I returned from grocery shopping. Old habits don't just disappear because the person they were built around does. The phone calls from Thomas were exactly what you'd expect: dutiful, distant, and brief. He'd ask about my health, tell me about the weather, mention something vague about work, never about Rebecca, never about when I might see Oliver again. The conversations ended with, "I'll call again soon," which we both knew meant in exactly 7 days for exactly 7 minutes. It was during one of these calls, about 3 weeks after my departure, that I finally asked, "Thomas, why did you let her do it? Why didn't you stand up for me?" The silence on the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom," he finally said, his voice strained, "you don't understand what it's like. Rebecca and we were having problems before you came. Your moving in just made everything worse." "Problems?" I echoed. What kind of problems justify treating your mother like an unwanted house guest? Another long pause. I can't talk about this now. Oliver's in the next room. Will you ever talk about it? Or am I supposed to just accept being pushed out of your lives without explanation? It's complicated, Mom, he sighed. Rebecca's been through a lot with her own mother. It's not personal. I almost laughed. Not personal? Thomas, being told I'm unwelcome in my son's home feels very personal. I have to go, he said quickly. I'll call you Sunday. The line went dead, and I sat there holding the phone, wondering when my articulate, compassionate son had become this evasive stranger. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Harold's funeral. I opened the liquor cabinet and poured myself a generous glass of the scotch Harold had saved for special occasions. I took it out to the garden bench and sat under a sky scattered with stars. Well, Harold, I said aloud, I think being exiled from your son's life counts as a special occasion, don't you? The night air carried no answer, but somehow speaking to him made me feel less alone. I sipped the scotch, feeling its warmth spread through my chest, and made a decision. I would not simply fade away into a convenient elderly oblivion. I would not become the grandmother who only exists in obligatory phone calls and holiday cards. The next morning, I called Margaret Wilson, my neighbor who had brought over the cake. I need your help, I told her. I need to understand what happened. Margaret, with her practical wisdom and no-nonsense attitude, came over that afternoon. We sat at my kitchen table with tea and the remnants of her cake. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. So I did. I told her about moving in with Thomas and Rebecca after Harold died, about how things seemed fine at first, then gradually deteriorated, about Rebecca's coldness, Thomas's silence, and finally, my unceremonious expulsion. Margaret listened without interrupting, her weathered hands wrapped around her teacup, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. When I finished, she nodded slowly. You know what this reminds me of? She said finally. It reminds me of what happened with my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, years ago. She told me how her son's wife had gradually pushed her out of their lives, how every suggestion was taken as criticism, every gift as an implication they couldn't provide for themselves. But here's what I learned, Eleanor, Margaret said, leaning forward. It wasn't really about me at all. It was about her own relationship with her mother, a woman who controlled everything, criticized everything. In Cynthia's mind, I was just another version of her mother waiting to take over. I thought about Rebecca, about the few things Thomas had shared about her family over the years. Her mother was a perfectionist. I knew that much. There had been some tension when they got married because her parents thought Thomas wasn't ambitious enough. So what did you do? I asked Margaret. I gave them space, she said simply. And then, when my grandson was about 8, I started writing to him directly. Just little notes at first, then longer letters. I never said anything negative about his parents. I just shared stories, memories, things about his father when he was young. I became real to him, not just this abstract grandma figure. And it worked? Margaret smiled. Not overnight, but eventually, yes. My grandson started asking to visit me. He became the bridge that his parents and I couldn't build ourselves. I thought about Oliver, about his tears when I left, his promise to visit. He was 12, old enough to maintain a connection if he wanted to. I think you're on to something, I told Margaret, but I need to be careful. I don't want to make things worse. Of course not, she agreed. This isn't about revenge or manipulation. It's about not letting fear and misunderstanding destroy a family. After Margaret left, I sat at my desk and pulled out a sheet of stationery, the good kind with my initials embossed at the top that Harold had given me years ago for Christmas. I began to write to Oliver. I didn't mention the conflict with his parents. Instead, I told him about finding an old photo album with pictures of his father as a boy. I described Thomas learning to ride a bike, building a treehouse with his grandfather, winning the science fair in 6th grade. I included a few of the photos, carefully selecting ones that showed Thomas at Oliver's current age. Your father was a lot like you, I wrote, curious about everything, kind to everyone, and very protective of those he loved. I hope these pictures make you smile. I miss our talks. Love always, Grandma. I addressed the envelope to Oliver directly, added extra stamps to be sure, and walked it to the mailbox before I could change my mind. Then I waited. 5 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Grandma? Oliver's voice was hushed, as if he was calling in secret. I got your letter. The pictures are so cool. Dad looks just like me. My heart swelled. He does, doesn't he? I thought you'd enjoy seeing them. Mom said I shouldn't call you. He continued, his voice dropping even lower, but I'm at Jake's house for a sleepover, and his mom let me use their phone. She doesn't know who I'm calling. A complicated mix of emotions washed over me. Joy at hearing his voice, sadness that he had to be secretive, anger that Rebecca would forbid him contact with me. I don't want to get you in trouble, Oliver, I said carefully. It's okay. I just wanted to say thanks for the letter and He hesitated. I miss you too. I miss you very much, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. But your parents make the rules, and we need to respect them. It's mostly Mom, he said, with the blunt honesty of a 12-year-old. Dad doesn't say much about it, but they've been fighting a lot. This caught me by surprise. Fighting? About what? Everything. Money, mostly. Dad's job, and sometimes about you. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Oliver, listen to me. Whatever problems your parents are having, they're not your fault. And they're not really about me either. Adults sometimes have complicated feelings. I know, he said, sounding suddenly older than his years. Jake's parents got divorced last year. He says you can tell when it's coming. The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. Were Thomas and Rebecca heading for divorce? Had my presence somehow accelerated problems that were already there? Oliver, I need to go now, I heard a voice call in the background. I have to go, Grandma. Jake's mom is taking us for pizza. Okay, sweetheart, thank you for calling. It made my whole day brighter. Can I call again sometime? He asked hopefully. Anytime, I said, knowing it probably wouldn't be soon. And Oliver, I love you very much. Love you too, Grandma, he whispered, and then he was gone. I sat holding the silent phone, processing what I'd learned. Thomas and Rebecca were having serious problems, financial ones apparently, and possibly more. Oliver was aware enough to be making comparisons to his friend's divorced parents, and somewhere in this mess, I had become both a symptom and a catalyst. Over the next few weeks, I continued writing to Oliver. Simple letters, nothing provocative, just stories and memories and questions about his life. I never received direct replies, but occasionally he would manage a secret phone call from a friend's house or the library. These brief conversations became precious lifelines, reminding me that I hadn't been entirely erased from my grandson's life. Meanwhile, Thomas's Sunday calls continued, mechanical and superficial. I never mentioned Oliver's calls or letters, and he never volunteered any information about problems at home. We performed this dance of polite avoidance week after week, until the Sunday he didn't call. I waited by the phone all day, checking for a dial tone every hour to make sure it was working. By evening, worry had replaced annoyance. This wasn't like Thomas, even in our current strained relationship. He was punctual to a fault, a trait he'd inherited from his father. Monday morning, I tried calling him. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to sound casual. Thomas, it's Mom, just checking in since I didn't hear from you yesterday. Hope everything's okay. Tuesday passed with no return call. Wednesday morning, I was watering the front garden when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. My heart stuttered when Thomas stepped out, looking exhausted, his normally neat appearance rumpled as if he'd slept in his clothes. Thomas? I set down my watering can. What's happened? He walked toward me slowly, his face a mask of fatigue and something else. Defeat, perhaps, or resignation. Mom, he said, his voice rough. I'm sorry I didn't call. Things have been... He trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Come inside, I said, taking his arm. He felt thinner under his jacket. I'll make coffee. In the kitchen, he sat heavily at the table while I busied myself with the coffee maker, stealing glances at him. He stared at his hands, wedding ring glinting in the morning light. When I set a mug in front of him, he looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Rebecca and I are separating," he said flatly. Though Oliver's call had prepared me for the possibility, hearing it stated so baldly still shocked me. "Oh, Thomas, I'm so sorry." "Are you?" he asked, with a bitterness that stung. "After how she treated you." I sat across from him, reaching for his hands. "Yes, I am, because you loved her, because you have a child together, because divorce is painful for everyone involved." He let out a long breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I'm staying at a hotel right now. We told Oliver last night." "How did he take it? How do you think?" Thomas's voice cracked. "He's devastated, confused, angry. All the things kids feel when their parents fail them." "You haven't failed him," I said firmly. "Marriages sometimes end. That doesn't make you a failure as a parent." He took a sip of coffee, grimacing as if it tasted bitter. "Rebecca thinks it does. She says I'm choosing my career over my family, that I'm just like my father." This surprised me. "Your father? Harold was devoted to you, to us." Thomas gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Dad worked 60-hour weeks my entire childhood, Mom. He missed games, school plays, parent-teacher conferences. He was physically present, but emotionally elsewhere." I sat back, stunned. This wasn't how I remembered our family life at all. Yes, Harold had worked hard at the insurance company, often bringing work home, but he'd also coached Thomas's Little League team for 3 years. He'd helped with science projects and taken us on summer vacations to the lake. "That's not fair, Thomas. Your father loved you more than anything." "I know he did," Thomas sighed, "but love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's actions. It's choices. And Dad consistently chose work over family time, just like I've apparently been doing." I wanted to defend Harold, to protest that Thomas was rewriting history, but looking at my son's tired face, I realized this wasn't about historical accuracy. This was about his perception, his lived experience, which had shaped the man and father he'd become. "Is that what the fighting has been about, your work hours?" He nodded. "Partly. The firm made me partner last year, which meant more responsibility, more travel. Rebecca says I'm never home, and when I am, I'm distracted, checking email, taking calls." "And the money problems?" I asked, remembering Oliver's comment. Thomas looked surprised. "How did you know about that?" I hesitated, not wanting to reveal Oliver's secret calls. "Just a guess. Financial stress often comes with career advancement, new expectations, lifestyle changes." He seemed to accept this explanation. The partnership meant a significant income increase, but also significant debt. We bought the new house, which is underwater after the market downturn. Rebecca wanted to renovate. Then there's Oliver's private school tuition, the country club membership Rebecca insisted we needed for networking. As he listed their financial commitments, I began to see a clearer picture of their life and the pressure Thomas was under to maintain it. "And where do I fit into all this?" I asked quietly. Thomas looked up, confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean?" "When I moved in with you after your father died, things changed between you and Rebecca. I could feel it. Was I just another stress point? Another obligation?" He was silent for a long moment, turning, his coffee mug in circles on the table. "It wasn't you personally, Mom. It was what you represented." "And what was that?" "A reminder," he said slowly, "of what happens when one partner prioritizes work over family for decades, leaving the other to handle everything else. Then suddenly they're retired or gone, and the one left behind is supposed to adjust overnight." The implication of his words hit me with stunning clarity. In Rebecca's eyes, I was the cautionary tale, the wife who'd accepted her husband's emotional absence for years, only to be left alone and dependent. "She saw me moving in as her future," I said, understanding dawning. "Her worst fear." Thomas nodded. "She said she couldn't bear watching me turn into Dad while she turned into you." The words hurt, not because they were meant to be cruel, but because they contained a kernel of truth I'd never fully acknowledged. Harold had been emotionally distant at times, absorbed in work and later in his clock repair hobby. I'd filled my life with other things, my piano students, volunteer work, gardening, and told myself it was enough. I didn't know she felt that way, I said finally, about me, about my marriage. I should have told you, Thomas admitted, but how do you tell your mother that your wife sees her life as a cautionary tale? We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken truths settling between us. So what happens now? I asked eventually. I don't know, he said, running a hand over his face. We're talking about a trial separation, 6 months. I'll get an apartment nearby so I can still see Oliver regularly. Rebecca's keeping the house. And what about your job? The partnership? A flash of something, determination perhaps, crossed his face. I've requested a reduction in hours and travel. Even if Rebecca and I can't work things out, I won't let Oliver grow up feeling like I chose work over him. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're a good father, Thomas, better than you give yourself credit for. He gave me a tired smile. I'm trying to be. He hesitated, then added, Oliver asks about you, you know. He misses you. My heart lifted. I miss him too, very much. Would you? Thomas paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Would you be willing to have him visit sometimes? Maybe stay with you occasionally? While I'm getting settled? Of course, I said immediately, trying not to sound too eager. Anytime. My door is always open to both of you. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. Thank you, Mom, for listening, for not saying, I told you so about Rebecca. I would never say that, I told him honestly. Marriage is complicated. I know that better than most. As Thomas prepared to leave, promising to call about arrangements for Oliver's visit, I found myself reflecting on the strange turns life takes. My exile from their home had been painful, humiliating. Yet here was my son, returning to me in his own moment of crisis, opening a door I thought had been permanently closed. Standing in the doorway, Thomas hesitated. Mom, there's something else you should know about why I didn't stand up for you that day. I waited, my heart beating a little faster. Rebecca gave me an ultimatum. She said if I didn't agree you should leave, she would take Oliver and go to her sister's. I was afraid. His voice caught. I was afraid I'd lose my son. The admission hung in the air between us. I thought of all the anger I'd felt toward him for his silence, his apparent abandonment, how simple it had been to paint him as weak, as disloyal, how much more complicated the truth turned out to be. I understand, I said softly, and I did. The fierce, protective love of a parent for a child. I knew it well. You did what you thought was best. Relief washed over his face. I'll call you tomorrow about Oliver, he said. And then he was gone, driving away in a car that suddenly seemed too big for just one person. I returned to the kitchen and sat at the table where we'd talked, running my finger around the rim of my coffee cup, now cold. The house felt different somehow, less like a museum of memories and more like a place where new stories might still unfold. That evening, I called Margaret to tell her about Thomas's visit. As always, she listened without judgment, offering practical advice about having Oliver stay with me. You'll need to update that spare bedroom, she said. 12-year-old boys don't want teddy bear wallpaper and antique quilts. I laughed. The wallpaper was gone years ago, but point taken. I'll ask what he's into these days. This is good, Eleanor, Margaret said, her voice warm. Not the circumstances, of course, but the opportunity to rebuild your relationship with Thomas and Oliver. I know, I agreed, though I can't help feeling a little guilty, benefiting from their marital problems. Nonsense, Margaret said firmly. You're not benefiting from their problems. You're being there for your family when they need you. That's what mothers do. After we hung up, I wandered into the spare bedroom that would soon be Oliver's, at least part-time. It was neat but impersonal, decorated in neutral tones with practical furniture. Nothing that reflected the energetic, curious boy who would occupy it. I made a mental list of things to buy. New bedding, perhaps a desk for homework, bookshelves for his things. I wanted him to feel this was his space, not just a room he was visiting. As I stood there planning, I realized something had shifted inside me. For months after being asked to leave Thomas and Rebecca's home, I'd felt diminished, erased, as if my value as a mother and grandmother had been negated. But standing in that soon-to-be transformed bedroom, I felt purpose returning. I was needed again, not in the way I'd imagined, perhaps, but needed nonetheless. The following week brought a flurry of activity. Thomas found an apartment and moved out of the hotel. Oliver came for his first weekend visit with me, bringing a duffel bag full of clothes and electronics, his face a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "I wasn't sure what to bring," he said, standing awkwardly in the foyer. "Whatever makes you comfortable," I told him. "This is your home too now." His face brightened at that. "Really? I can leave stuff here?" "Absolutely. In fact, I thought we might go shopping tomorrow, get some things to make your room feel more like yours." Over that weekend, I discovered how much Oliver had grown in the months since I'd left their house. His voice had deepened slightly. He developed passionate interests in astronomy and graphic novels. He ate with the voracious appetite of a growing boy, making me realize how long it had been since I'd cooked for someone who truly appreciated food. We set up his room together, hanging a solar system model from the ceiling and arranging his books on new shelves. We baked cookies and watched science documentaries, and in quiet moments, when he thought I wasn't looking, I caught glimpses of sadness in his eyes, the unavoidable grief of a child whose family is fracturing. On Sunday evening, as Thomas was due to pick him up, Oliver sat at the kitchen table watching me prepare a container of cookies for him to take home. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "why do people get married if they're just going to get divorced?" I set down the spatula I was holding and joined him at the table. "That's a big question, sweetheart." "Dad says they still love each other, but they need space to figure things out," he continued, making air quotes around the phrase. "That doesn't make any sense. If you love someone, don't you want to be with them?" I chose my words carefully, aware of the weight they might carry. "Love is complicated, Oliver. Sometimes people love each other very much, but still have trouble living together happily. Your parents are trying to find the best way forward for all of you. But what if they don't get back together?" His voice was small, vulnerable. Jake's parents said the same thing about figuring things out, and now they live in different states. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I can't promise what will happen with your parents, but I can promise that both of them love you more than anything in the world, and so do I. That will never change, no matter where everyone lives." He nodded, not entirely convinced, but perhaps a little comforted. "I'm glad I can come here," he said after a moment. "It feels normal here." His words touched me deeply. In the midst of his parents' separation, my quiet house had become a haven of normalcy for him. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very home I'd fled because it felt too empty after Harold's death now offered stability to my grandson. When Thomas arrived, Oliver hugged me tightly before leaving. "See you Friday?" he asked hopefully. "I'll be right here," I promised. Thomas lingered after Oliver went to the car. "Thank you for this weekend," he said. "He hasn't been this animated in weeks." "It was my pleasure," I told him sincerely. "He's welcome anytime, not just on your scheduled weekends." Thomas nodded, then hesitated. "Mom, Rebecca asked if you would call her. She wants to talk." My surprise must have shown on my face. "It's about Oliver," he added quickly. "School stuff, I think. Nothing confrontational." "Of course," I said, though uncertainty fluttered in my stomach. "I'll call her tomorrow." After they left, I sat on the porch swing Harold had hung years ago, watching the summer evening settle over the neighborhood. Children rode bikes in the dimming light, sprinklers hissed on lawns. Normal life continued all around me, while inside I contemplated the strange request from my daughter-in-law. The next morning, after rehearsing various opening lines in my head, I called Rebecca. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious but not cold. "Eleanor, thank you for calling." "Thomas said you wanted to speak with me," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Yes." She paused, and I could almost see her gathering her thoughts. It's about Oliver's school schedule. With Thomas and me, with our current situation, there are going to be logistical challenges. I understand, I said, though I wasn't yet sure what she was asking. Oliver has band practice on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Thomas can't pick him up those days because of work commitments, and I have therapy appointments on Thursdays. She took a breath. I was wondering if you might be willing to help with transportation those days. You'd need to pick him up from school at 3:15 and either bring him home or keep him until one of us could get him. The request was so practical, so unexpected after months of being treated as an intrusion that for a moment I couldn't respond. "Eleanor?" Rebecca prompted. "Are you still there?" "Yes, sorry," I said quickly. Yes, of course I can pick Oliver up those days. I'd be happy to." "Thank you," she said, sounding genuinely relieved. "This separation has complicated everything, especially for Oliver. I'm trying to maintain as much stability as possible for him." "That's admirable," I said carefully, "and I'm glad I can help." There was a pause, filled with all the things we weren't saying, the accusations, the hurt feelings, the day she'd told me to stay away from their marriage. "Oliver enjoyed his weekend with you," she said finally. "He came home talking about the cookies you made and something about a solar system hanging from the ceiling." "We set up his room together," I explained. "I wanted him to feel at home." Another pause. "That was thoughtful of you." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, strictly focused on Oliver's schedule and needs. As we were about to hang up, Rebecca said something that caught me completely off guard. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology for how things ended when you were staying with us. It wasn't my finest moment." I sat down on the nearest chair, unprepared for this acknowledgement. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "I was going through some things," she continued, her voice careful. "Issues with my own mother that I projected onto you. It wasn't fair." "We all have complicated relationships with our mothers," I said, thinking of my own mother who had been loving but emotionally reserved, and with our mothers-in-law. "Still," she said, "the way I handled it was wrong. I want you to know that." After we hung up, I sat holding the silent phone, processing what had just happened. It wasn't exactly a warm reconciliation, but it was an opening, a small crack in the wall that had been built between us. Over the following weeks, a new routine developed. I picked Oliver up from school twice a week, sometimes taking him directly to Rebecca's house, sometimes keeping him for dinner until Thomas could collect him. Occasionally, when both parents were busy, he would stay overnight at my house on a weekday. These new arrangements brought me back into their lives in a peripheral but consistent way. I saw Rebecca regularly during drop-offs and pickups. Our interactions were cordial, focused on Oliver, but gradually less strained. Thomas came by more often, sometimes staying for dinner when he picked up Oliver, sharing cautious updates about his life in the new apartment, his adjusted work schedule. One Thursday afternoon in late September, I arrived at the school to find Oliver waiting with a friend and the friend's mother, a woman about Rebecca's age with a warm smile and an air of confident ease. "You must be Oliver's grandmother," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Diane Lewis, Ethan's mom. Oliver's told us so much about you." "Eleanor Bennett," I replied, shaking her hand. "It's nice to meet you." "We were just discussing weekend plans," Diane continued. "Ethan's having a few boys over for a backyard campout on Saturday. We'd love for Oliver to join them." Oliver looked at me hopefully. "Can I, Grandma? Dad's going to a work thing, and Mom said to ask you or Dad." I hesitated, not sure of my authority in this situation. "That sounds fun, but I should check with your parents first." "Of course," Diane said easily. "Here's my number. Have them call me if they have any questions." She handed me a business card that identified her as Dr. Diane Lewis, clinical psychologist. Later that evening, when Rebecca came to pick up Oliver, I mentioned the invitation. "Diane Lewis?" Rebecca said, recognition crossing her face. "Ethan's mother? She's Oliver's school counselor, actually. They assigned him sessions after—" She trailed off, but I understood she meant after the separation. "She seems nice," I offered. "Very warm." Rebecca nodded. "She's been helpful to Oliver. To me too, actually. She recommended my therapist. She looked slightly embarrassed at this admission. "That's good," I said sincerely. "Professional support can make a big difference during difficult times." Rebecca gave me a searching look, as if trying to detect any judgment in my words. Finding none, she seemed to relax slightly. "Yes, it has. I should have done it years ago, honestly." The small moment of vulnerability from Rebecca felt significant, a tiny piece of common ground in what had been a battlefield. "About the campout," I said, returning to the original topic. "Oliver seems very excited." "It should be fine," Rebecca said. "Diane runs a tight ship from what I've seen. I'll text Thomas, but I'm sure he'll agree." As she and Oliver prepared to leave, Rebecca paused at the door. "Eleanor, would you be willing to take Oliver shopping for a sleeping bag this weekend? Thomas mentioned he's swamped with work, and I've got a commitment I can't break." "I'd love to," I said, perhaps too eagerly. Rebecca smiled, a small, tentative smile, but genuine. "Thank you for everything you've been doing. It's made this whole situation easier for Oliver." After they left, I sat on the porch swing again, watching fireflies begin to appear in the early evening darkness. Something was shifting in my relationship with Rebecca. A thawing, a cautious reassessment on both sides. The sleeping bag shopping expedition that weekend turned into a full day out with Oliver. We found not just a sleeping bag, but also a flashlight, a compass, and a book about constellations for the campout. Afterward, we had lunch at his favorite burger place and saw a movie about space exploration. As we drove home, Oliver unusually quiet beside me. I glanced over to find him watching me with a thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" I asked. He hesitated, then asked, "Grandma, do you think Mom and Dad will get back together?" The question I'd been dreading. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "That's something only they can figure out." "Mom seems different lately," he continued. "Less angry. She doesn't cry in her room as much." My heart ached at the image of Rebecca crying alone, and at the fact that Oliver had been aware of it. "People often need time to adjust to big changes," I said carefully. "Your mom is probably finding her way forward just like everyone else." Oliver nodded, processing this. "Dad seems sad, though. Every time he drops me off, he looks at the house like he misses it." "I'm sure he does miss it," I said. "He misses living with you full time. Do you think he misses Mom too?" I chose my words with extreme care. "Your father and mother shared many years together, Oliver. They created a family and a home. Those connections don't just disappear, even when people decide not to live together anymore." He seemed satisfied with this answer, turning to look out the window at the passing scenery. After a moment, he said, "I'm glad you're here. Grandma, before, when you lived with us and then had to leave, that was bad. But this is better." "Better?" I echoed, curious about his perspective. "Yeah, now I get to see you without—" He trailed off, apparently reconsidering his words. "Without what?" I prompted gently. He looked down at his hands. "Without Mom being upset about it." The simple observation from a 12-year-old crystallized something I'd been sensing but couldn't quite articulate. In the current arrangement, with Thomas and Rebecca separated, I was no longer perceived as a threat to Rebecca's role or authority. I was simply Oliver's grandmother, helping with practical matters, providing an additional support system during a difficult time. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son's marital problems had created space for me to return to their lives in a way that his intact marriage couldn't accommodate. The campout was a success, according to Oliver's excited recounting when I picked him up Sunday morning. As we were leaving, Diane Lewis pulled me aside. "Oliver's doing well, considering the circumstances," she said quietly. "Having you as a consistent presence has been stabilizing for him." "I'm glad," I said. "I worry about him, caught in the middle of all this." Diane nodded understandingly. "Children are remarkably resilient when they have secure attachments. Oliver knows he's loved by both parents and by you. That makes all the difference." She hesitated, then added, "Rebecca speaks highly of you, you know. She's mentioned how helpful you've been during the separation." This surprised me. "We've had our difficulties in the past." "So I've gathered," Diane said with a small smile. "But people can change, especially when confronted with their own patterns. Rebecca's doing some important work on herself right now." As Oliver and I drove home, I found myself reflecting on Diane's words. People can change. Was that happening with Rebecca? With me? With all of us? The autumn weeks passed in a rhythm of school pickups, weekend visits, and gradually warming relations. Thomas reported that his reduced work schedule was going well, though the partnership track was now likely closed to him. "And honestly, Mom, I'm okay with that," he told me one evening. "I'd rather have time with Oliver than another promotion." In late October, as Halloween approached, Oliver announced that he wanted to have a small costume party at my house. "Just 4 friends," he assured me. "We can watch scary movies in the basement and have pizza." "That sounds fun," I said. "But shouldn't you have it at your mom's house? She has more space." Oliver looked down at his shoes. "Mom's been really tired lately, and her new medication makes her feel sick sometimes." This was news to me. "Medication? Is your mom ill?" "Not like sick," Oliver explained. "She says it's for her anxiety and stuff. The doctor said it might make her feel worse before she feels better." I tried not to show my concern. Neither Thomas nor Rebecca had mentioned any medication or health issues. "I see. Well, of course we can have the party here, but let's check with your parents first." To my surprise, both Thomas and Rebecca readily agreed to the Halloween party plan. Thomas offered to help supervise, while Rebecca seemed almost relieved. "That's very kind of you, Eleanor," she said when I called to confirm. "Oliver's been looking forward to Halloween, but I've been—" She paused. "Let's just say I haven't been up to party planning lately." "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound concerned rather than prying. Oliver mentioned something about medication. There was a long silence on the line. Then Rebecca sighed. "I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Apparently, it's something I've had for years but never addressed properly. The separation brought everything to the surface." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "That must be difficult." "It is," she admitted, "but it's also clarifying in a way. Understanding why I've reacted so strongly to certain situations, why I've felt so threatened by many things, including you." The directness of her statement caught me off guard. "Me?" "Yes," she said simply. "My therapist and I have been discussing my issues with maternal figures. My relationship with my own mother is complicated, and that affected how I responded to you." I wasn't sure how to reply to such an unexpected confession. "Anyway," Rebecca continued, filling the awkward silence, "the Halloween party sounds perfect. Thank you for offering." After we hung up, I sat thinking about this new information. Rebecca's acknowledgement of her mental health struggles and her insight into how they had affected our relationship felt like a significant breakthrough. For the first time, I could see her not as an antagonist who had pushed me out of my son's home, but as a woman dealing with her own complex issues that had little to do with me personally. The Halloween party was a chaotic success. 5 boys in various superhero and monster costumes rampaged through my house, eating enormous amounts of pizza and candy, screaming at appropriate moments during the mildly scary movies Thomas had approved. Oliver, dressed as an astronaut, seemed happier than I'd seen him in months, temporarily free from the weight of his parents' separation. As the evening wound down and parents began arriving to collect their children, I was surprised to see Rebecca at the door. She looked tired, but smiled when Oliver ran to hug her. "Mom, you came. Did you see my costume?" "I did," she said, adjusting his helmet. "Very impressive. Did you have fun?" "The best. Grandma let us build a fort in the basement for the movies." Rebecca glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "That sounds wonderful." As the other boys departed, Thomas began cleaning up the kitchen while Oliver showed Rebecca around the house proudly, pointing out his room and the various improvements we'd made together. I was wiping down the counters when Rebecca returned to the kitchen alone. "Oliver's showing his dad the fort," she explained. "He's very excited about it." I nodded, suddenly feeling awkward in my own kitchen. It was no trouble. The boys had a good time. Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, watching me work. "You've created a real home for him here," she said after a moment. "A safe place." "I've tried," I said, unsure where this was heading. "When you lived with us," she continued, her voice careful, "I felt like you were taking over my home, my role. I couldn't see that there was room for both of us in Oliver's life." I set down my dishcloth and turned to face her fully. "I never intended to replace you, Rebecca." "I know that now," she said quietly. "My therapist calls it scarcity thinking, the belief that love and connection are limited resources, that if Oliver loved you, somehow he'd love me less." She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud." "Not ridiculous," I said gently. "Human." She met my eyes, and for perhaps the first time I felt we were truly seeing each other, not as rivals or as roles, but as women with our own fears and hopes. "I've been unfair to you, Eleanor," she said, "and I've been thinking about that day when I told you to stay away from our marriage. I was afraid of turning into my mother, afraid of losing my identity in motherhood, afraid of Thomas choosing work over family like my father did, and somehow you became the target for all those fears." Her honesty left me momentarily speechless. This was more than I ever expected to hear from her. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "It helps me understand." Rebecca nodded, then glanced toward the basement where we could hear Oliver's and Thomas's laughter. "They sound happy down there," she observed. "They are," I agreed. "Thomas is a good father. He's really trying to balance everything better now." "I know," she said softly. "That's one of the reasons we're starting marriage counseling next week." I tried not to show my surprise. That's good news, isn't it?" "I think so," she said cautiously. "We have a lot to work through, but seeing how he's changed his priorities, how he's put Oliver first through all of this, it's made me reconsider some things." Before I could respond, Oliver bounded into the kitchen, followed by Thomas. "Mom, Dad says I can sleep over at Grandma's tonight if it's okay with you. Please?" Rebecca looked at Thomas, who shrugged. "It's fine with me if Eleanor doesn't mind. Save us driving back tonight." "Of course he can stay," I said. "His room is all ready." Rebecca hesitated only briefly. "All right, but remember you have soccer practice tomorrow afternoon." "I'll make sure he's back in time," I promised. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she surprised me by giving me a brief, awkward hug. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "For everything, really." After she left, Thomas helped me finish cleaning up while Oliver got ready for bed. "That was unexpected," Thomas commented, nodding toward the door Rebecca had just exited. "The hug?" I asked. "The whole evening," he said. "Rebecca coming here, staying, talking with you. She's been different lately, more reflective." "She mentioned you're starting counseling," I said carefully. Thomas nodded, a mix of hope and caution in his expression. "Her idea, actually. I'm not sure what will happen, but I think we both want to try." Later that night, after both Thomas and Oliver were asleep, Thomas on the living room couch, Oliver in his room, I sat on the porch swing wrapped in a blanket against the late October chill. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights illuminating the occasional late-night dog walker. I thought about the strange journey of the past year, Harold's death, moving in with Thomas and Rebecca, the painful exile, Thomas's separation. And now, this unexpected thawing between Rebecca and me, this tentative rebuilding of family connections in new configurations. None of it had gone according to plan, my plan or anyone else's. Yet somehow, through the pain and loss and misunderstandings, something valuable was emerging. Not the family structure I'd imagined, perhaps, but one with its own strength and possibility. As winter approached, Thomas and Rebecca continued their counseling. Oliver split his time between their two households and increasingly mine as well. The three adults in his life established a careful dance of communication and cooperation, centered around his well-being. Rebecca and I developed a cautious friendship, built initially around practical matters concerning Oliver, but gradually extending to other areas. She asked about my garden. I inquired about her therapy. We exchanged book recommendations. Small steps toward understanding. One snowy afternoon in December, Rebecca called and asked if she could stop by. She arrived looking nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope. "I've been going through some papers," she explained as we sat at the kitchen table with tea, "and I found these." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs, pictures of Thomas as a child that I'd never seen before. Thomas on his first day of college. Thomas at his graduation. Thomas on his wedding day looking at Rebecca with unguarded love. "Harold took most of these," she said, sliding them across to me. "He gave copies to Thomas over the years, but I don't think you ever saw them." I picked up the photos with trembling hands. Here was my son's life, moments I'd missed or forgotten, preserved through my husband's eyes. "Why are you giving these to me?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Rebecca met my gaze steadily. "Because they're part of your family history, and because I've been thinking about what you said that day in our kitchen, that you never intended to replace me. I believe that now." She hesitated, then continued, "My mother controlled everything in our home. Every decision, every emotion had to revolve around her needs. When you moved in with us, I was terrified of history repeating itself. But you're not her, and I'm not her either, though I've had to work hard to break those patterns." I looked down at the photographs, at my husband's vision of our son growing into manhood. Harold was often emotionally distant, I admitted, focused on work, then on his hobbies, but he loved Thomas deeply. He just didn't always know how to show it. "Thomas is learning," Rebecca said softly. "We both are." As she prepared to leave, Rebecca paused at the door. "We're having Christmas dinner at our house, Thomas and Oliver and me. We're not back together exactly, but we thought it would be good for Oliver to have one day of normalcy. We'd like you to join us, if you want to." The invitation, so unexpected and significant, brought tears to my eyes. "I'd like that very much," I managed to say. Christmas Day arrived with gentle snow and quiet anticipation. I drove to the house I'd once fled in humiliation, bearing gifts and a homemade pie, uncertain what the day would bring. Thomas opened the door, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, embracing me warmly. Inside, the house was transformed. Holiday decorations glittered in every corner. Delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. Oliver rushed to greet me, excitedly showing me the new telescope he'd received that morning. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wearing an apron and a tentative smile. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor. I'm glad you could come." The day unfolded with surprising ease. We ate together at the dining room table, sharing stories and laughter. Thomas and Rebecca moved around each other with careful courtesy. Not the easy intimacy of a reconciled couple, but not the tension of adversaries either. After dinner, as Oliver played with his gifts in the living room, the three adults sat at the table with coffee and pie. "This feels good," Thomas said, looking between Rebecca and me. "All of us together." "It does," Rebecca agreed. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about something, actually, a proposal of sorts." Thomas and I both looked at her curiously. "The housing market has improved," she continued. "We could sell this house now without taking a loss. It's too big for just Oliver and me anyway." "You want to move?" Thomas asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I've been looking at smaller places," Rebecca explained, "closer to the center of town, and I was thinking—" "Eleanor, your house in Cedar Falls is pretty far from Oliver's school and activities. Have you ever considered moving closer to Burlington?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I've thought about it," I admitted, "especially during winter, when the driving gets difficult, but I haven't seriously looked into it." Rebecca nodded. "There's a duplex for sale about 10 minutes from the school, 2 completely separate units, but connected. I thought it might be a good solution for all of us." Thomas looked between Rebecca and me, clearly as surprised as I was by this suggestion. "You're proposing that you and Mom buy a duplex together? Live next door to each other?" "It's just an idea," Rebecca said quickly. "I know it sounds unconventional, but Oliver could move easily between both homes. Eleanor would be close enough to help with school transportation, and we'd each have our own space, our own privacy." The proposal hung in the air, radical and unexpected, yet somehow perfectly logical, a solution none of us could have imagined a year ago when Rebecca had told me to stay away from their marriage. "What about you and Thomas?" I asked carefully. "How does this fit with your reconciliation efforts. Rebecca and Thomas exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We're taking things slowly," Thomas said. "I'm keeping my apartment for now, but we're committed to co-parenting Oliver, whether or not we eventually live together again. And I think," Rebecca added, meeting my eyes directly, "that having you nearby would be good for Oliver. For all of us, actually." I sat back, overwhelmed by the suggestion and all it implied. This woman, who had once seen me as a threat to her family, was now proposing we become neighbors, partners in creating a stable environment for my grandson. "I would need to think about it," I said finally. "It's a big change." "Of course," Rebecca said quickly. "It's just something to consider, no pressure." Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Thomas walked me to my car. Snow was falling gently, coating the world in pristine white. "What do you think about Rebecca's idea?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'm surprised," I admitted. "A year ago, I wouldn't have thought it possible." Thomas nodded, looking back at the house where Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching us. "A lot has changed. We've all changed." "For the better, I think," I said softly. "I hope so," he replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "I'm sorry for how everything happened, Mom, for not standing up for you that day, for letting you leave like that. It's in the past," I told him, touching his face gently. "We're finding a better way forward now." As I drove home through the snowy streets, I thought about Rebecca's proposal. The practical aspects made sense: being closer to Oliver, having help nearby as I aged, creating a more cohesive family unit despite the separation. But beyond the practicalities, there was something profoundly healing in the suggestion. It represented a complete transformation of our relationship, from adversaries fighting over emotional territory to allies creating something new and functional. When I reached my house, Harold's and my house, I sat in the driveway for a long moment looking at the familiar outline in the darkness. So many memories lived within those walls. So much of my history with Harold, with Thomas, with the life I'd built over decades. Could I leave it behind? Start something new at 67? The answer came to me not in words, but in a feeling, a lightness, a sense of possibility that I hadn't experienced since before Harold's death. The house behind me was full of memories, yes, but the future ahead held something equally valuable: connection, purpose, family, reconfigured but intact. Over the following months, Rebecca's unconventional proposal became reality. The duplex was purchased, renovations completed to suit our respective needs. My house in Cedar Falls sold quickly to a young family with children who would fill it with new life and memories. Moving day arrived in late spring, almost exactly a year after Rebecca had told me to stay away from their marriage. Oliver bounced between the two connected units, helping both his grandmother and his mother arrange furniture and unpack boxes, his excitement palpable. "This is so cool," he kept saying, "like having two homes right next to each other." Thomas, who had been gradually spending more time at Rebecca's house again, helped with the heavy lifting. I noticed the easy way he and Rebecca communicated now, the small touches and private smiles that suggested their counseling was bearing fruit. That evening, after most of the unpacking was done, Rebecca knocked on the connecting door between our units, bearing a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. "Housewarming," she explained as Thomas appeared behind her. "Oliver's asleep already, the moving wore him out." We sat in my new living room, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, and shared the wine. Through the window, I could see the small garden space we would share, already planted with flowers and vegetables, Rebecca's and my joint project over the past weeks. "To new beginnings," Thomas proposed, raising his glass, "and to family," Rebecca added, "in all its complicated, evolving forms. To finding our way back to each other," I said softly, "through unexpected paths." As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. Not the life I had planned or expected, certainly, but one rich with possibility, connection, and hard-won wisdom. Later, after Thomas and Rebecca had returned to their side of the duplex, I stood at the window looking out at the night sky. Somewhere in the vastness above, I liked to think Harold was watching, perhaps surprised but ultimately approving of this unconventional arrangement. "We found a way forward, Harold," I whispered. "Not the one we imagined, but perhaps the one we needed." The journey from that painful morning when Rebecca told me to stay away from their marriage to this peaceful evening in our shared living space had been long and difficult. There had been hurt, misunderstanding, rejection, and loss, but also growth, forgiveness, and the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding connections on new terms. I had packed my bags that day, believing I was leaving my family behind. Instead, I had begun a journey that would ultimately bring us all back together, not in the same configuration, but in one that allowed each of us the space to be fully ourselves while remaining connected. As I prepared for bed in my new home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before Harold's death. The intrusion I had feared becoming had transformed into something else entirely, a vital part of a family constellation that had room for all of us, with our flaws and needs and love. Sometimes, it seems, we must leave to find our way back. We must lose what we thought we needed to discover what truly sustains us. And sometimes the people who push us away are the very ones who ultimately help us find our rightful place, not as intruders, but as essential pieces of a greater whole. If you've ever felt pushed aside by those you love, if you've wondered whether there's a way back from rejection and hurt, know this: families are more resilient than they appear in moments of crisis. Love, when given time and space to evolve, can find new expressions, new configurations that honor both our connections and our individual needs. The intrusion I never was became the bridge we all needed, a path to understanding that has brought us finally home.